In today's video, we're going to continue our 2019 NHL offseason plan series, and we're discussing the Florida Panthers, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So welcome back to the 2019 NHL offseason plan series. If you're new to this series, we basically break these videos down to 3 segments. In segment 1, we're going to do an 18-19 season recap, where we take a look at how the team did and take a look at some key metrics, including some team stats and individual player stats. We're also going to look at any significant changes this team went throughout the year. Segment 2, we're going to analyze the salary cap situation, look at any pending UFAs and RFAs and what contracts that need to be tended to this summer. Also, in the third segment here, we're going to jump into what moves this team needs to make to get ready for next year. And there's a lot of speculation around this team, so you're going to want to watch this video all the way through to stay tuned for that. And also, if you're new to this series, there will be a playlist up here in the YouTube cards. You can check it out if there's other teams you haven't caught already. We're about 2/3 of the way through the league. There's only a handful of teams left. So if the team you're looking for is not there, stay tuned. They will be posted here over the next week as we try to wrap this series up. Now let's jump into the 18-19 season recap for the Florida Panthers. Now, as you can see, the Panthers had a disappointing year, finishing at 36, 32, and 14. They're an 86-point campaign, 5th place in the Atlantic Division. I know many people, myself included, predicted the Florida Panthers to make a big step forward this year and get back to being a playoff team. Unfortunately, they struggled with being an inconsistent team here yet again and did not follow through on that at all. Now, taking a look at some of the key team metrics here, let's look at special teams and goal scoring for and against. The power play was awesome, 26.8%, second best in the NHL. They really had a phenomenal year on the power play. It took a lot of advantages on many opportunities there. On the PK, they were pretty solid as well, 81.3% for 10th best in the NHL. So obviously their special teams were not a problem. It was more so the 5-on-5 play. That's where they gave up more of their goals and certainly struggled to keep up here, lost too many hockey games that way. Obviously, goals for, though, were not much of an issue overall. They scored well on the power play as well as even strength. 267 goals for 9th best in the NHL. They had a lot of players, which we'll get into here in a moment, that really broke through with some major increases this campaign. Goals against, though, was the major down point of this team. They gave up 280 goals for 28th best in the NHL. So obviously overall team defense and goaltending was not an area of strength for this club. Now let's jump over and take a look at the key individual performances, including goaltending and their top scorers. Now, starting goaltender Roberto Luongo had a somewhat disappointing season, 18, 16, and 5. He still missed more time again this year. The last few years, he's had a hard time remaining healthy and has struggled with being consistent. He had an .899 save percentage and a 3.12 percentage. Unfortunately, if you take a look at goaltender James Reimer, it wasn't a whole lot better either. So their goaltending certainly was not great this year, and that was a big part of the issue. Taking a look at some of their top scorers, though, we really saw some major breakthroughs from some of their younger leaders on the team, including Alexander Barkov, who came through with a 96-point season. An absolutely phenomenal year for Barkov. He's really proven to be one of the more elite players around the NHL. Of course, another young player who's been around for a while too now, Jonathan Huberdeau, put up a 92-point campaign. He really also broke through and had some major increases this year. Of course, the newly acquired Mike Hoffman in his first year at the Panthers put up 70 points. He had a major point streak early in the year, so I think he worked out quite well with the Panthers. However, there is some question marks over his future with the club, which we'll get into in an upcoming segment here. And of course, Dodonov had 70 points as well. And on the back end, Keith Yandel led the way with 62 points. Now let's take a look at some of the key changes and trades this team made throughout the year. Now, obviously, we saw a fairly substantial trade that the Panthers made with the Pittsburgh Penguins later into the season, where they traded forwards Nick Bjugstad and Jared McCann to the Penguins in exchange for Riley Sheahan and Derek Brassard. Now, of course, Brassard was later traded to Colorado, and Sheahan's an unrestricted free agent, so we'll talk about him here shortly. But that was really, more than anything, a salary cap dump, in my opinion. They knew they were getting back players that had a low likelihood of staying with the club longer term, especially Brassard. Sheahan could stay, but he's not going to be a big contract anyway. But obviously, that was kind of one of the moves that kind of led to a lot of the speculation about what their offseason plans will be, which we'll get into here momentarily, which I guess for Panthers fans is probably the most exciting and intriguing part about this team here in a while. Of course, they did decide at the end of the year to fire head coach Bob Bugner after a few years behind the bench and mediocre results. They've decided to part ways, and then they brought in the heavyweight champ of coaches here, Joel Quenneville, who was hired to take on the responsibilities to be the next coach here. So obviously, Joel Quenneville used to work with Dale Talon in Chicago. Those two have a long relationship from before. Obviously, the Panthers seem to be pretty serious about spending money, not only on coaches, but on players on the ice too. They're really trying to put a lot of money into this team to kind of revitalize it, get the fan base excited, get more people in the seats in the arena, and try to create some excitement around this team. And it started with the hiring of Coach Quenneville. It certainly shows that they're very serious in that regard. Let's take a look now at segment 2, where we look at their cap situation and any expiring contracts. Now, on the RFA list, there's not a whole lot here that really needs to be too concerned about. They've got Dennis Malgin, Mackenzie Weegar, and Ian McCoshen. Obviously, these players could very well be retained, but none of them are going to earn big money deals, but nothing too significant there. On the UFA front, they do have Troy Brouwer, Jamie McGinn, and Riley Sheahan. Personally, I think it's unlikely that Brouwer returns. It is possible Sheahan could return on a short-term deal. Again, it's certainly debatable as well. I'm not really sure what their plans are with him. But either way, the good news is that all these contracts that are expiring, it's not significant parts of their team. So overall, they're in pretty good shape that way. Looking at the overall cap situation, right now for next year, they have 15 contracts in place for a total of $61 million, which gives them a cap space of 21.95. Let's jump over here to segment 3, where we look at any potential changes this team should make to get better for next year. Now, of course, the Florida Panthers are a team surrounded by a lot of talk, a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors on what they're going to do. It's certainly even picked up even more after they hired Coach Joel Quenneville. The big thing that they're likely looking at doing and have been speculated to do is bringing some big-time free agents, including forward Artemi Panarin and goaltender Sergei Bobrovsky. Now, personally, I do think that the odds of this happening are really, really good. Obviously, with the connection between Quenneville and Panarin as well, being his former coach in Chicago, it makes it even more intriguing for him to possibly go down and play in Florida. I know it seems like these two players are more interested in what's going to work for their personal lives as much as it is professionally. Sergei Bobrovsky's home in Columbus is already up for sale as well, so it looks as though it's a foregone conclusion that they're not going back to Columbus. Now, I don't think it's an absolute 100% guarantee that they go to Florida, but I do think it's really likely that this actually does happen. Because of that, I would expect the Panthers to be heavily involved making some other moves to shed more salary. If you look at what kind of contracts they're both going to command, they're going to have to make some other trades here. Even though they have lots of cap space, I do expect some other moves to be made so they're not too tight and kind of fill out this roster. Now, obviously, if they take Bobrovsky on, there's no need for them to have Luongo and Reimer. Now, due to Luongo's age, his contract, he does have a form of a no-trade clause. That makes it complicated. So I think more than likely they find a way to move James Reimer off the roster, trade him for whatever they need to move him on, and they go with a tandem of Luongo and Bobrovsky next year. That's my opinion. I think Luongo is better suited at this point in his career to be a backup anyway. And if they can have Bobrovsky play a big chunk of the games and have Luongo go into that role as a backup, I think they'll be much better suited. So I do expect James Reimer to be dealt this summer. Not sure exactly where or what the return would be, but the return would have to be something insignificant that's not going to go on the roster right away. So we're talking about picks and prospects or something small in that regard, or something more for future related. Of course, I do expect them to probably trade another forward to free up more space as well. That there's been a lot of talk about Jonathan Huberdeau going to the Penguins lately, and I know we talked about it probably maybe 3-4 weeks ago. There was a lot of talk about an Evgeny Malkin trade to the Florida Panthers for Huberdeau and some other players, and really that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. I'm not sure that Malkin's really going to be leaving Pittsburgh. I know the Penguins have been rumored to be making some big changes. There was some talk about how Malkin could be tight with his other Russian friends and that maybe they all want to play together. And I can see that maybe being the case, but it's a big deal. I'm not really sure something like that would happen. Malkin would have to waive his no trade to make it happen anyway. A lot of talk around that. I'm not so sure that's going to happen. It came up about a month ago. I've seen it come up again lately about a potential trade, which had been all quiet on the Malkin front. I'm not sure where this is coming from here yet again. Maybe there is something more to it. But trading Huberdeau is a player that I would not make that deal. I mean, as much as it would be nice to get Malkin on your team, trading Huberdeau, I'm not sure that would be the way to go. At this point, you could probably make an argument that Huberdeau might be as productive or more than Malkin the rest of the way through here, or at least as long as Malkin plays. So that would be a dangerous deal in my opinion. But either way, I would think more likely a player like Mike Hoffman gets traded. He had a pretty solid year, 70 points. He's a pending unrestricted free agent, so he may not be able to be retained anyway. If they spend enough money on other contracts this summer, he might have to go next summer anyway. So why don't you trade him now while he has a year on his contract, has more value, and then you could recoup something for the future in that deal as well. So obviously I do think a player like Hoffman defenseman is more likely to be traded and to free up more space here longer term. Now, at the same time, adding all these big names through free agency is certainly going to go a long way. If they add Bobrovsky, they're going to have their goaltending situation solidified. Their blue line isn't too bad, but obviously could use some upgrades as well. You have some young players though that need to be worked into this lineup too with the forward group, like an Henrik Borgstrom, like an Owen Tippett. These guys have certainly earned an opportunity, in my opinion. Prospect Alexei Heponiemi is also coming back to North America looking for a spot. Of course, he dominated in the Western Hockey League, went back, played over in Europe. Now he's coming back to North America. He did officially sign his entry-level deal with the Panthers not too long ago, so he's going to be looking for playing time too. So obviously, they've got some young players they can kind of fill some holes with here in order to kind of free up some cap space, have them on entry-level deals, which is going to prove to be very useful. All these players, it looked like they have a lot of potential to be excellent prospects here and have good, solid careers. We'll see once they get a chance to play on a regular basis. But having them guys in the lineup will help with the cap situation overall here as well. But overall, I expect significant changes from the Panthers this year. They're one of the more interesting and intriguing teams to keep your eye on throughout the offseason. I do expect big things here, but I'd love to know your thoughts, especially if you're a Panthers fan. Let me know what you think on the possibility of bringing in guys like Bobrovsky and Panarin to the Florida Panthers, and what players would you trade out to kind of give your team more cap space flexibility to kind of round out the roster. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe to the remaining videos in this series, as well as plenty of other great content. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.